Hey everybody, it's Professor Parish, and I hope you guys have had a great holiday weekend. It's week 5 in English 122, so that means we are well over the halfway mark in the class. So, as I said, this class has gone by very quickly. We only have a few weeks left of classes, and so we're on the upward swing now. So we are going to start talking about drama this week. As I've said in previous lecture videos, we don't spend a whole lot of time on drama for several reasons. The main one is that SIC does offer a lot of drama-related classes. We have theater appreciation, we have English 243, which is actually intro to drama. So if you like drama and you finish this class with a C or higher, you can take English 243, and I highly recommend it if you need a humanities class to get your associates done, or if you're an English or speech major. English 243 is a great class to have that transfers, and I took it when I was at SIC. It's fine. It goes over a lot of the same dynamics we talk about this week. So if you like what we talk about and you're like, I'd like to learn more about that, 243, English 243 is a great class to take. But because we offer these other drama classes, I don't spend a lot of time in this course on drama, just because I want you, if you like it, I want you to branch out and go take those classes, because they'll go into much greater depth. But we still need to talk about drama in this class, so we are going to talk about it, and then hopefully it's going to go by very quickly because I want to give you enough prep time for your final paper, and we'll talk about that next week. So next week we will talk about the final paper, but this week is going to be pretty simple. We're just going to talk about the first part of the drama presentation. We're going to do that, and then we're just going to go over assignments. So it should be a pretty easy week. As I'm recording this, it is Sunday night of week 4. So if you've not submitted your poetry paper or completed your poetry exam or the discussion forum, please make sure you do so by tonight. So I'm going to minimize myself and show you guys in our assignment section. For week 5, there's 4 assignments. There is our discussion forum, which I will pull up here and show you all. The discussion forum this week is going over these 3 little video links. They're very short. They're not long videos at all. They're maybe a couple minutes each. And they're just talking about theater in relation to film and text. So how is theater different than an experience of reading a book or watching a movie? And John Malkovich, who actually is from around our area, he is a theater-trained actor, and he's been in a lot of different movies. He's been recently in that show Space Force on Netflix. He gives a little spiel here in one of the videos talking about the difference between acting on stage and acting in a film. And so I've got 3 quick questions here that ask about your opinions based on the videos and based on the chapters that we're going to talk about in this presentation. So should be a pretty easy discussion forum to complete. Then we have these 3 other assignments. We have the MLA scavenger hunt, which I'm going to open up here for you all. As far as the scavenger, everybody's been doing pretty good on the MLA assignments. I've been pretty satisfied with how you all have been doing, but I want to go ahead and pull this up to show you. So the MLA scavenger hunt, all this is basically is I would like you to find 4 sources of your own that meet the criteria listed here. So I want you to find a online article, that's one. An interview. You can either do a published interview, or if you want to make this one up, I'll let you take the easy route and you can make up an interview for it if you're going to do the basic format. If you want to cite a published interview, then you'll need to look it up. A print book, and then finally a peer-reviewed journal. Now, by peer-reviewed journal, I know that word throws a lot of students off. They're like, what does peer-reviewed mean? Any journal that is published that has a claim. So like the American Psychological Journal or the Science Journal of Natural Resources or the Communications Quarterly. Those are all journals that are scholarly articles that in order to be published, you have to submit an article. It goes to 2 peers or people in your field. Those 2 peers do not know each other. They don't know that they're each reading the same article. They could be from different sides of the world. But they will review your article, and they'll either say, yes, this belongs in the journal, or no, it doesn't. The kicker is if you want to be published in a scholarly peer-reviewed journal, both peers have to say yes. If one says no, you're rejected. There's just no publication. So because of that, and because it's kind of like a blind review, you really are dependent on both people approving your article, and it's a very strenuous process. So because of that, if I ever see you cite a peer-reviewed journal article, I'm going to say that it's credible because it goes through a very extensive process to get published. That's what peer-reviewed journal means in the long run. So I want you to find one of those articles. I would like you to try and use our library resources to look up at least one of these sources. Obviously, we're working remote. We are not on campus. So I understand if that's going to be difficult for some of you. And if that is the case, then if it doesn't work out, you can use a search engine like Google to find these sources. But I want you to try to use our library resources. So what that means is if I go to SIC's website, if I go to SIC, I will go up here to library resources. It's this link right here at the top. Okay. And like I said, we are working remote, so it's a little bit hard. But what I would do is look at this link that says journal search. And now what's going to happen is, for me, it's not going to work. But for you all, what's going to ask is for your student ID number and then the last four of your social. And hopefully that will allow you to look up resources. There's a journal search that you can look up online journals and just type in a subject, and it should give you a whole bunch of journals that you can reference. But if for some reason this doesn't work, I understand. You can use Google. It will be okay. But that's the scavenger hunt. Okay. And then the paper 3 thesis and outline, this assignment's the exact same as what we've been doing with paper 1 and paper 2. I just want to know what is your topic and what is the basic outline of your paper. That's it. You don't have to do a draft, nothing like that. As far as our guidelines go, these are our guidelines for paper 3. Basically, what you're doing is you are picking a play and you are going to read it and analyze it. You can use video reviews, you can do film adaptations, you can do summaries, analyses, whatever medium you want to analyze the play that you picked. You can choose a play from our textbook. As you can see here, we have about 800 pages worth of plays in our textbook. It's insane the resources that we have in this textbook for discovering literature. So you can use either the textbook and choose a play from it, or if there's a play you really like, or a play that you're very familiar with. I know last year SIC did Little Shop of Horrors. Maybe you were in that play and you really liked it and you want to analyze it instead. That is perfectly fine. If there is I know Hamilton just came out on Disney Plus. If you want to use Hamilton as your review for this paper, go for it. I'm all about it. I basically just want you to analyze the play in terms of character, setting, theme. Definitely those three, character, setting, and theme. I want you to talk about those three. And then any other terms that stand out for your play, you can include those. And those terms will be ones that we discuss in the PowerPoint I'm going to review today, in our textbook, just terminologies that apply to drama. So I want to know what type of play it is. Is it a modern American play? Classic Greek theater? Shakespearean? What type of play is it? If it's not one of those three, is there a term in our textbook that describes it, like tragedy or comedy or intrigue? What makes it fit into that category? So that's number 2 there. And my dog's barking in the background, so you'll have to bear with me. And then finally, what drew you to this play? Why did you pick this play? And what should readers or viewers take away from that play? What is the overall purpose? So these 3 questions here, I want your paper to definitely answer. And then you can add more information if you want. The paper has to be 3 to 5 full pages, double-spaced, 12-point font, 1-inch margins, like we've been doing. If you use our textbook, which you probably will, much like paper 2, you need to cite your textbook. And then any other sources that you use, you need to cite. So if you don't use a play from our book, if you use Hamilton, for example, on Disney Plus, you need to cite the play Hamilton. If you find a play on YouTube, you need to cite YouTube. So you just need to cite your play if it's not in the textbook. And then any other resources you use, you need to cite those as well. And then we've got our MLA discussion presentation, our in-text citation video. All those resources are there for you to use. As far as due dates, this coming Sunday, the 12th, is when the thesis and outline is due, and then the following weekend will be the paper 3 draft. I will go ahead and tell you that next week we are going to start talking about paper 4 already. I know it's going to be soon, but I want to get you guys started on that paper because it's a little longer. So we're going to talk about that next week. But like I said, I honestly think that the drama paper is one of our easiest papers to write because it is very cut and dry. There's not a lot of spectacle or skepticism. You have the questions here to answer, and then if you need more content, you can always discuss more terms. You can break down the play in more detail. From students talking to me afterwards, they say that this paper is probably the easiest in the class to get out of the way. So the Dropbox is already open for next week, so if you do, please make sure that I approve your thesis and outline before you submit the final draft, just in case that it doesn't work. That way I don't have to open the Dropbox back up for you. But if that happens, I will. So there's that. And then obviously it's out of 100 points. The content, grammar, spelling, intro and conclusion, and the formatting and page length are all going to be looked at as well. So I'm pretty excited. You guys are a really diverse and interesting group, so I am very curious to see what plays you guys decide to talk about. Like I said, our textbook has so many. It has so many to choose from that you really could choose any from those 800 pages and be fine. But if you want to use outside plays, go for it. I've had students do that too and have been really successful. Okay. And then the final assignment is the reading response. Number 3, and we're almost done with our reading responses. So this reading response is pretty basic. There's 2 videos here. One is discussing the plot and summary of Antigone. The other one is the plot and summary for Shakespeare's Hamlet. I will go ahead and apologize. The Antigone video is a student-made video, and it's really well done. If you've never read Antigone, it's actually kind of the first fan fiction I think that's ever been published. It's a play that's based off of the Greek legend of Oedipus. Antigone is Oedipus's daughter, and this video will give you basically the plot-by-plot, beat-for-beat summary of what happens in Antigone. The Hamlet video, I will go ahead and apologize. It's like from Cliff Notes, which I don't normally use, but this video is very, very thorough and breaks everything down in a very compact, neatly arranged package. The only downside is the man's voice is the most monotone, boring voice in existence. And I hate it. It's a great video. If you want to know beat for beat what happens in Hamlet, this video will tell you. It's just kind of boring to listen to, so I'm going to apologize for that. Definitely be awake when you're listening to the Hamlet video. So for the reading response, after you watch those 2 videos, and they're about 5 to 10 minutes each, I want to know the answers to these 4 questions. What term from our textbook sections on Greek tragedy and Shakespearean drama, what terms apply best to these 2 plays? They can be the same term applied to both, or it can be different terms applied to each. So whatever you want to do, I just want to know what term or terms apply to Antigone and Shakespeare's Hamlet from our book, The Best. If these plays have been written in different time periods, what would change and what would be similar? Antigone and Hamlet are written hundreds of years apart, but they have a lot of similarities that I think, and they're written in a way that I think you could switch either of these 2 plays and have them be written in the opposite time period, and some things would change, but some things would stay the same. So I'm curious what your opinion about those are. Specifically, what about the relationship between Haman and Antigone and Hamlet and Ophelia? How are those similar and different? If Antigone was a Shakespearean play, would anything change? If Hamlet was a Greek tragedy, would anything change? And please give me something on those questions. I've had students before be like, no, nothing changed. Nope, nothing would change. And I'm like, the point of the question is for you to give me something. I know it sounds rhetorical, and it's easy to just say, nah, everything be the same. I want you to tell me something that'd be different. I want you to give me a difference. So, and these are due by Sunday as well. I think that by the time you answer all 4 of these questions, it's going to be about double-spaced, about a page in length, but it can be longer than that depending on what you write. But that's kind of what I'm aiming for. But So that's our reading response number 3. So those are our assignments for this week. Like I said, they're pretty cut and dry because we're getting through drama. So what I want to do now is go through and talk about, I go back to the beginning here. Drama! Chapters 26 through chapters 30. And I'm going to go ahead, since we are talking about paper 4 next week, and that's probably going to be a lengthier video, I'm going to go ahead and just try to talk about as much as I can with this presentation. So we'll probably get through all of the drama in this. Okay. All right. So there is a big difference between theater and film and text. These 3 kind of mediums for how we experience narratives. If you've ever been in a play, which I've been in plays before in high school and in college, the idea of acting on a stage is a very unique experience. And I would imagine that it's similar in film, but different, as you guys will see in the John Malkovich video. But theater and film is a drastic difference from just text. And I think that's where a lot of people get hung up when they go to see movies based on their favorite book. Because when you read a book, unless there's actual pictures, our own imaginations kind of fill in the gaps. We determine what the characters look like, we know what they sound like, we have all of this figured out in our heads. And then when someone else creates a movie or a theater experience of that text, a lot of people can feel kind of disappointed because it's not what you expected. So I think that's why a lot of people get kind of grumbly when they see their favorite book adapted into a movie or into a stage performance. They're like, well, that's not how it should be, because we have a kind of a preconceived notion of what that text should look like. I said we'd talk about monologues. We are going to talk about monologues. Soliloquies and monologues are the 2 types of internal dialogue that we see in drama. Here's how I keep them separate. Soliloquies, scenes. Monologues, moments. A soliloquy will be an entire scene of a play that is just someone talking to themselves. Hamlet has got some soliloquies. Shakespeare loved himself some internal dialogue, and he had several soliloquies within his own texts. Monologues are moments. They're just a brief moment where a character will think something out loud, but it's really just them talking to themselves. And because you're on a tiny theater stage, the suspension of reality happens where I may be 5 feet from the person next to me and I'm talking to myself, but it's understood that the person standing right next to me can't really hear me because that's just the illusion of stage. An aside is when characters speak to each other in private or off to the side of the stage, hence the term aside. And then a confidant is like a secret keeper. It's someone that's entrusted with some information in a play, and they typically spill the beans and tell it to someone else and don't keep their secrets, but that was their job. Foil is probably my favorite drama term. I love the term foil, and we're not talking about math foil. I had a student on the drama exam, when I asked them what a foil was, an example, they gave me the math definition. The math definition, like what are you even... This is English 122. No, not Math 144. So don't give me the math definition of foil. I want to know that a foil is 2 large personalities that play off of each other. The most common example is like a buddy cop movie. You got the stern, hardcore cop that's been on the job for 40 years, and then you got the wild, reckless young cop that's like doesn't want to play exactly by the rules, and they kind of butt heads and deal with each other for an entire movie. That's a foil. Draco Malfoy, Harry Potter, they're foils. I'm trying to think of a more modern one than just Harry Potter. I would say, that's a good question. You guys can probably think of some good ones too. Iron Man and Captain America are foils. Personalities are different, but they have a lot of similarities. So that would be one too. But ideally, you have 2 big personalities that are kind of just playing off each other throughout the entire play. We have complex characters that are multidimensional. They're basically round characters that we've talked about in prose. Recognition is when characters are realized by others or recognized by others in the play. And then an idiom is a common phrase for a culture or a language. So my friends in college, they actually taught an English course for some South Korean students that came to our university over the summer. And their job was to teach them idioms, because a lot of those students, they didn't understand. Like, for example, they would say, oh, I'm just kidding. Well, these South Korean students did not know what just kidding meant. They're like, what are you talking about? What does just kidding mean? And so my friends would have to try to explain, oh, it's an idiom. In our culture, it means, oh, we're just joking around. And they were like, oh, you mean like tradition of the joke? Is that what you're saying? And they were like, yeah, that's it. So just kidding would be an idiom. If you said that you were just joshing around, that's an idiom. It's just a phrase that really doesn't make sense to anyone outside of a culture, is what an idiom is. The Mystery at the Middle of Ordinary Life. This is a very short little play, and if you've got your textbook on you, I would have you turn to page 1138. You can pause this video and do that if you want, and then unpause it when you get to that page, and then we'll pick right back up where you left off. Okay, so if you found page 1138, Don DeLillo, he's a very famous playwright. Mystery at the Middle of Ordinary Life is a very short little one-act play. It's very minimalist. It just has 2 characters. And you can see on there that the dialogue starts out very elaborate and very specific, and then as the play goes on, it gets more and more generalized and kind of vague. So look at that play and just kind of examine how it would feel or look on stage if you were to see 2 people act it out. It's just them having a conversation. How is it similar and dissimilar to Hemingway's Hills Like White Elephants? You can kind of get the idea from right off that these characters aren't fully explained. They don't really have names. They don't have a lot of character development. They're not rounded in any way. And their conversation is pretty vague, where we don't get any specifics except that maybe they're an older couple and they're having a midlife crisis. And so just check that play out, because it's kind of unorthodox. It's kind of different than most plays that we see in our textbook. And so I wanted to make sure that you saw that this, much like Hills Like White Elephants, this type of minimalist style can be effective if it's done right. We have external versus internal conflict. Internal obviously being within the mind, external being in the world. And then I like this term too, Deus Ex Machina, Latin for God machine. In Greek plays, it was a plot device. So if the writer of the play had their characters like up against a corner or leaning off the edge of a cliff, and they're like, how do I save them? They would kind of do like a little fan service moment and would have like a Greek god or Greek goddess like just come rescue them. Like Apollo would swoop down in his chariot and rescue him, and everybody would be like, oh my gosh, it's Apollo. And then that would be the whole point. They'd be like, it wouldn't make any sense in the context of the play. There was nothing leading up to that moment of Apollo coming out of nowhere, but then he'd show up and save the day, and everybody would be like, what? And then that would be the big moment. And we still see Deus or Deus Ex Machina used over and over again as a modern trope. It has been used as a literary device for thousands of years, and it's still effective. So probably the most common example that I think comes to mind is in Toy Story 3. If you've not seen Toy Story 3, I'm sorry to spoil you. I have younger cousins. I watch a lot of Disney movies. There's a scene where Woody and Buzz and all the friends in Toy Story are like about to fall into this molten pit of lava. And out of nowhere come the little aliens from the Claw game. They just come out of nowhere and they just swoop down like Apollo and lift Woody and his friends up and just carry them off. They weren't really mentioned in the rest of the movie. They don't really have a purpose to the plot. They just show up, save the day, and then just vanish, and it's like, okay, cool, thanks. That's a Deus Ex Machina. You could probably think of some other ones. In Jurassic Park, my favorite Deus Ex Machina in modern film is the big T-Rex at the end comes in and like just takes the velociraptors out, and there's that big banner that flies behind them, and it's just epic and wonderful. That's a Deus Ex Machina. How'd that T-Rex get in the museum? Don't care. Save the day. We're good. So it's a pretty common plot device, and plays use it a lot. Subplots are extra small plots in the play that may or may not connect to the rest of the play as a whole. An ode, we've talked about this in the last video, is just a tribute. Often chorus members in the play, your chorus being a group of people that sing your exposition, they often use it as a tribute. And then we talked about rhymed couplets in poetry being that 2 lines in a play that end in a rhyme. And Shakespeare did this a lot. So chapter 27 is about Greek tragedy. Greek tragedies, and if you think about how plays have changed, Back when they were doing Greek tragedies, there were not props. There weren't elaborate sets. You were standing on a concrete stage or a stone stage in just robes, and maybe you had giant paper mache masks that helped distinguish which character was which, but that's about as elaborate as it got. The rest of it was just you trying to converse as loudly as you could, the dialogue, so everyone around you could hear. So it was a very different type of play than we'd experience now. But from Greek tragedy, we have a lot of terms with drama. Messenger is the person delivering news to characters in a play. The phrase, "don't shoot the messenger," that comes from Greek tragedy, because usually the messenger bared very ill news of what was happening. Genre, we get this term, and genre is just types of writing, or in this case, it was types of plays. The complication is the problem or what starts the conflict. So at some point at the start of the play, some type of action will happen that will spurn things into motion. So in Hercules, the Disney Hercules, for example, the complication is that Hercules decides to go out and find his real father. He meets him at Mount Olympus, and the complication is that his real father gives him an ultimatum of how he can become a hero and take his place back home. That starts all of the action leading forward. So that's the complication. The denouement is a French term that means the unraveling of the plot towards the climax. So usually when things start to happen in a rapid pace leading towards the climax of the show or the play, that's the denouement. Peripétie is also French. It means the twist in the story, or like the plot twist. Something drastic happens, usually right before the climax of the play or film. And then catharsis is a purging or cleansing of feelings. So at the end of Hamlet, spoiler alert, everybody dies. Everyone dies in Hamlet, and it's a very cathartic moment because there's no emotion by the time you end that play. It's just like everything ends and you're like, what just happened? And then some random guy comes in and takes over, and that's the end. But that's catharsis. Other Greek terminology for Greek tragedies, the tragic flaw was the fatal weakness of a character in a play. So usually characters would be really strong and all-powerful except for one little tiny thing. And for the most part in Greek tragedies, the biggest tragic flaw was hubris, which in our modern-day context we refer to as pride. So characters would be too proud, they wouldn't adhere to advice, they'd do things anyway, and then it would turn out to be it would have poor results. When we talk about ethos, logos, and pathos in English 121, pathos usually means an emotional persuasion, but pathos actually comes from the Greek word for suffering. So there usually would be a lot of pathos in Greek tragedies, where the characters would not have happy endings and would have to face like suffering or punishment for their actions throughout the play. And then we go back to this idea of antagonist versus protagonist, which we've talked about in the prose section, as your protagonist is just the person who's the main character, your antagonist is just acting against them. Shakespearean tragedy. With Shakespeare, stage business, Shakespeare changed everything. And I think that a lot of people think he's overrated. And it's true that I don't think that every play or every story he's ever written is a masterpiece. But Shakespeare changed a lot. A lot of how Western audiences view plays. Shakespeare brought about the idea of stage business, which is using props and set changes. During Greek times, there were no set changes or prop changes. Shakespeare was like, no, let's make elaborate sets, let's have props, let's have costumes, let's make it look authentic. And he really kind of ushered in that revolution in theater of doing that. And so it's kind of revolutionary that he kind of sparked this trend, whereas before it was not nearly this elaborate. Shakespeare created his own genres. So intrigue and revenge tragedy were genres that he kind of coined for himself. Hamlet and Macbeth being kind of your big revenge tragedy and intrigues as well. Intrigues are mystery, suspense, or thrillers, and then obviously your revenge tragedy is your most famous of that genre is Hamlet. And we've seen Hamlet spun off into I don't know how many countless stories. The Lion King, it's based off Hamlet. My parents watched Sons of Anarchy for a while, and I tried to watch it with them, but then I was like, this is just Hamlet. And my parents were like, no, it's not. I'm like, it's pretty much Hamlet. And if you've watched Sons of Anarchy, it's Hamlet. So, but it's kind of cool that he created his own genres, and we're still using them today. Other Shakespearean terms, Shakespeare drew a lot from Greek tragedy. He was influenced a lot. And when you guys watch the video for the reading response of Antigone and Hamlet, you're going to probably see some similarities and be like, oh, well, Hamlet could have been during Greek times. And that's because Hamlet was influenced a lot by Greek mythology, by Greek stories, and storytelling techniques. He liked to use blank verse, which we talked about in the poetry section, unrhymed iambic pentameter as a style of playwriting, which is not easy to write in, so kudos to him for wanting to do that. And then I really like this term colossal protagonist. It's a main character that overshadows other main characters. So sometimes in stories, the main characters and the side characters, they're all pretty equal. Like in Harry Potter, for example, yeah, we've got Harry Potter. We also have Ron, we have Hermione, we have Sirius Black, we have Snape, we have McGonagall, we've got Luna Lovegood. There's all these characters and they're all kind of on equal playing fields. Harry doesn't like tower above all of them. But in Hamlet, for example, if I said, okay, obviously Hamlet's our protagonist, who's our other characters? If you've read Hamlet, you'll probably say Ophelia. You might say Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, might say Claudius. But if you've never seen Hamlet before, do you know characters other than Hamlet? If you've never seen Harry Potter before, and I mentioned Harry Potter, if I say the name Draco Malfoy, you probably are like, oh, that's from Harry Potter. If I say Dumbledore or Voldemort, you're like, oh, that's from Harry Potter. But if I say Hamlet, name me other characters, and you've never seen the play before, you might have trouble doing that. And that's because Hamlet is a colossal protagonist. He is a main character in that story that overshadows all the other characters. And Shakespeare intentionally did that because at the time, he wanted word of mouth to spread for his plays to get people to come watch them. And the best way to do that was to have a main character that kind of was overarching and kind of like all-encompassing to get people to say his name. Like, oh, did you see Hamlet? Did you see this play about Hamlet? And Hamlet. To get people to come watch the plays. So that's kind of his reasoning behind that. And it was effective. You can see on page 1371, the section called Juxtapositions. It's just showing different analyses of Hamlet. So if you end up wanting to do Hamlet for your paper 3, I would highly suggest going to page 1371 because there's people that have looked at Hamlet from a feminist perspective, looked at Hamlet from a historical perspective, from a psychological perspective, because think back in Shakespeare's days, they didn't have a catalog of disorders or diseases that people had. So there's been a lot of psychoanalysis on the character of Hamlet and saying, okay, no, this guy actually had a mental disorder. Here's what it is. So definitely check out that section, especially if you're thinking about writing on Hamlet for paper 3. Chapter 29 is American drama. Plays, for the most part, just like Greek plays stayed the kind of overarching popular style of plays in the Western world until Shakespeare. Shakespearean plays were kind of the norm until around the 1920s. So until the 1920s, people were still watching plays based on Shakespeare, on Greek tragedies, on Victorian lit, things like that. But around the time of the Great Depression, people got a little bit tired of watching plays about royalty because no one had any money and those characters were no longer relatable. And the idea of escapism was not something that was just appealing at the time. So people were clamoring to have stories about characters they could relate to. And so American drama was kind of this subgenre that started as a way to give audiences the realism that they were looking for. So these plays were about ordinary families. They were about the quote-unquote everyman. There was nothing fancy about them or spectacular or fantasy-based. It was all very real and true to life. The term chronological realism meant that the play was acting in real time. There weren't time skips. It was just like scene after scene was just linearly in the same chronological order. And so the two biggest plays that are discussed in our book are Death of a Salesman and Raisin in the Sun, which are both excellent plays. And I would highly encourage you, if you're going to choose a play out of our book, definitely give both of them a look, especially Raisin in the Sun. Raisin in the Sun is just a good play. And I think that in both of these plays, Death of a Salesman and Raisin in the Sun, there's a lot of context that even though these plays were written nearly 50, 60 years ago, there's a lot that's still relevant today. And I think that they're definitely worth looking at to kind of review. And then chapter 30 is about comedy. This chapter is just talking about how humor is used in plays, and it's changed throughout the years. Everybody thinks that comedy is much more raunchy than it was. No. During Shakespeare's time and Greek times, there was some pretty raunchy humor. It just was more subtle, I suppose. There's 3 terminologies that are given to comedy and their use in plays and films, and they're kind of in a hierarchy. You have satire. And satire is very, it's subtle, it's callous, it's kind of talking about like the hypocrisy of certain systems. It's a very political and kind of high art kind of comedy. I think of Coen Brothers, Fargo, Burn After Reading, very highbrow, dry humor. Then there's a parody, which is kind of the middle ground. Parodies, I think we see the most common. Parodies are eccentric, they're distinctive, they're very visceral comedy. It's very tongue-in-cheek, but it's also very funny and in your face, but it can be subtle at times. So Twin Peaks, Monty Python, Between Two Ferns with Zach Galifianakis, if you've ever seen that. He's basically doing a parody of a talk show. It's noticeable that it's supposed to be funny, but it's also kind of clever in how they do it. That's a parody. And then there's farce, and farce is not subtle or clever at all. Farce is just straight up slapstick, surface level humor. So Family Guy, Robot Chicken. Farce can be funny, but it's not trying to be smart or clever or subtle. It's just like, no, here's the joke. You get it or you don't. Those are our 3 types of comedy, and they will be on your exam. Chase of wit is when characters trade quirky remarks back and forth. The Avengers and all the Marvel Universe comic movies, they do a spectacular job of this. I always think of the first Avengers when Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr.'s character, is having the conversation with Loki, and Loki's like, we have an army, and Robert Downey Jr.'s like, we have a Hulk. That's Chase of wit, that just back and forth banter. Wordplay is verbal humor, and we have puns, which my little cousins love puns. They think they're hilarious. And it's just words that are through different iterations for effect. So if you're like, ice to meet ya, that's a pun. A terrible pun, but a pun, because you're saying ice instead of nice. And then you can look up puns. It's nearly limitless. Your stock characters are characters that people are expected to laugh at. So they're kind of archetypes, caricatures. I always think of LeFou in Beauty and the Beast. He's a stock character. He's just that comedic short guy. You find that a lot of older stories had like a kind of like a minion sidekick, like an Igor or a LeFou, that they were just there for the audience's expense. And luckily, modern storytellers have found ways to kind of get away from stock characters because they're either stereotyping or cliche, but they still do exist in a lot of plays. Another term is tragicomedy, which is when genres mix. So if a play has black humor or dark humor, that's a tragicomedy, where it's like something funny is happening, but it's also kind of sad. So you can look up tragicomedy, and it's in our book, some examples of that as well. All right. So that, my friends, I went through the entire drama presentation. So what I will do is I will just next week, for week 6, summarize that I went over it, and you guys can come back to this video to watch. But originally I was going to get through half the presentation in this video, but as I'm thinking about it, if I'm going to talk about paper 4 next week, that may take a little while. So I just went ahead and did it for this week's video. So I'm sorry it's long, but hopefully you're still listening and you stayed tuned. I hope you guys had a very safe and fun holiday weekend. As you can see, I got sunburnt, so yay. But I will be reading the rest of your papers this week so I can get those back to you, reviewing the rest of your poetry exams. And then when we come back for week 6, we will wrap up drama and start talking about our final paper of the class. It's already here. I can't believe it. So I'm excited to see what plays you all choose for paper 3. As always, I'm working Monday through Thursday from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. If you have any questions, you can contact me or email me anytime, and I'll get back to you. But I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you all back again at week 6.